and he was never heard of again. So he must have disappeared in the turmoil of the First World War, the Caucasian front. So my father grew up without knowing his father. And it was only by chance that in the 1930s he was able to find a photograph of his father, so he knew what he looked like. And that's the only picture we have of him. But my maternal grandparents, grandmother and grandfather, left Van in May, I think 1915, after the self-defense battles and the arrival of the Russian troops. When the Russians started retreating, the entire population followed them. And I remember my grandmother was telling me that her mother was actually making some jam in the garden of the house in huge copper cauldrons with fire underneath, when news came that you have to leave within a few hours. So they collected whatever they could, valuables that they could carry, and left Van, never to return. I told you last time that because her mother was a very fastidious person, cleanliness was paramount for her. She would pay Russian soldiers accompanying this caravan of Armenian refugees a gold coin to allow them to walk fast ahead of the column, so that she could wash the hair of her daughters and then join the caravan afterwards.
It's such an incredible story.
Yeah. They arrived in Igdir first and then went to Ramarlu and then to Echmiadzin. My grandmother was put in an orphanage in Yerevan, next to the diocesan offices, Arachnor Taran. And the only thing I have of her from this period is a photograph. It could be with my sister, I don't think it's with me, of the orphanage children, about 80 or 90 of them photographed. It's a fading photograph, but she's there. But there's also another Armenian celebrity in that photograph. It's Tatul Altunyan. And he's holding a little mandolin in his hand. Because he was an orphan as well, in the same orphanage. And then, I think after the Sovietization of Armenia in 1921, because my grandfather, who was a very young man, had been working in one of the ministries of the First Republic, thought it better for him to leave the country. And the only open frontier at the time was the Iranian frontier. So they left and settled in Tabriz. That was their journey.
Did he belong to a political party?
I think he was a sympathizer of Dashnak Tsutyun. Not a member, he never was a member, and I think he remained a sympathizer of the party until his death. But it was a very nostalgic sympathy that he had. He did not mix with the diasporan organization. I remember him saying that a political party can only function in its own country, not abroad. You can't have an Armenian political party outside Armenia. And therefore, although he sympathized with the principles of Dashnak Tsutyun, he never mixed with the party in Iran.
That's an interesting view.
Yes. And he also never bought property
in
Iran, because he said, we had one. They had a large house, apparently, where he came from, the town of Arjesh. He said, I can never be sure that I can keep it. So if you are renting a place, you can leave whenever you want without regretting that you've left behind your property. So he wasn't he wasn't sure that he wasn't going to live again.
Interesting how it stays with you and changes
Yeah,
your
of course.
outlook on
Yes,
life.
yes.
Yeah,
It does, yes. You feel in exile all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get prepared for all eventualities if you.
Yes, yes. Because he did it twice, you see. In the first 21 years of his life, he left Argesh and he left Yerevan twice. So he had no guarantee that this wasn't going to happen again.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Can we just switch back to Van defense?
Yes.
Years? Do you know much about it? How your family were involved?
As far as I know, they were not involved in any of the battles, or well, at least I haven't heard. I've heard nothing about that. My grandmother was very young then, 7 years old, I think. They thought they will have the protection of this American doctor, Dr. Usher, who lived with his family in Van and worked in an American missionary run hospital. And they were neighbors, so she would play with his children. They thought if the Armenian self-defense did not work, they might have the protection of this American family. But it didn't come to that. The Russian army arrived, and after a while, the entire Armenian population left.
Do you know what happened to the Americans?
Oh yes, he published a book actually, Dr. Usher, about his experiences in Van. And 10 years ago, his grandson came to London, and we organized an event with him at the Armenian Institute, and he talked about memories of his grandparents, what they told him about what was life like in Van. It was a very interesting meeting.
Incredible, you found each other after so many years.
Yes, I can't remember how the contact was established. He was then a very respected lawyer in East Coast of the United States. I don't know why he'd come to London, but he and we gathered all the Vanetsis living in London, and they all had heard of Dr. Usher and his family.
Interesting. Is there big? Do you know how many of them would be in London?
Oh, I
Descendants of
don't
Van.
know. Perhaps a few dozens. Yes, there will be. Yes. There were
Would
quite a
these
few.
be people who had the same journey as your family? From Van to.
Well, initially, of course, they all ended up in either Echmiadzin or Yerevan, because that was the route that the caravan took from Van to the Caucasus. Some went to Tbilisi in Georgia. Some left the Caucasus and ended up in Europe and came back. So I think each family has, and some of course went south, not from Van itself, but from villages to the south of Van. Once the Russian army arrived, instead of going north to the Caucasus, they went south to what is now Iraq. And a lot of many members of the Iraqi Armenian community are actually from that region.
So not all of them were accompanied by Russian army. I'm just trying to see the impact of
No, I
military.
think they went south and were under the protection of the British Army in Iraq in 1916 onwards. But there was there were comings and goings until the Turkish Republic was established. Surprisingly, some Armenians kept their lands in and around Van and would return from Yerevan to supervise the harvest and go back.
Amazing.
And of course they were employing not Armenian laborers, but local Kurdish or possibly even Turkish laborers. So it's not a very black and white picture. There are lots of grey areas.
How would you explain that? Why some of them were allowed to keep the lands, or?
Oh, I think perhaps the government structure had broken down in that part. So until the Republic was established, there was this situation of transitory situation, that things like that did happen. Not everywhere, but they did happen in certain areas.
So your family left, you were saying, in May?
Yes, I think when the retreat started, not long after the arrival of the Russian army. It was in the summer, or a very early summer, end of spring, early summer. It must have been then, yes. At least there were no casualties due to harsh weather when they arrived in the Caucasus. Of course, there the situation was terrible. Lots of infections and diseases in Etchmiadzin. A nephew of my grandmother's actually died under the walls of the monastery in Etchmiadzin because they were camping outside the walls in open air. Her sister was married. She was married in Van, and she had 2 children already. One of them was a year and a half old, and the other one, the baby, was perhaps a few months old. And the baby died just one night. They woke up in the morning and the baby was dead.
Oh,
Yeah. And they lost their mother in Etchmiadzin as well. That's why she was put in an orphanage.
Okay. But everyone survived the actual journey with the soldiers'
Yes,
protection.
as far as I know, yes. And there were 4 sisters and a brother, my grandmother's family. 2 of the brother and one of the sisters stayed in Yerevan. They didn't move. My grandmother came to Iran. The 2 other sisters left Iran through Lebanon to go to the United States. They stopped at Marseille. The husbands found jobs and they settled in Marseille. So I have cousins, 2nd, 3rd cousins in Armenia, but also in France. From my grandmother's side.
So it was Russian army's initial journey which led them to
Yes,
Etchmiadzin, and they spread
that's
all
right.
over the world.
Yes. So some went to Tiflis, some stayed in Yerevan. Others even went to Rostov. So
large
yes,
Armenian community there in Rostov.
that's right. Yes, for a very, very long time, and also many Armenians in Rostov who came from a particular region of Persia called Salmast. For some reason, they all, like most Armenians now, go to Glendale in Los Angeles. Many Armenians from this region in Iran would go to Rostov because they knew there were jobs. It was possible to make good money in a short period. So lots of these people settled in Rostov until the 1930s, when the harshness of Stalinist regime became not intolerable. They came back to Iran. Most of them were Russian speakers, actually.